Imagine walking through corridors, where emperors once ruled with absolute power, yet where betrayal, lust, and murder were as common as the sunrise. The Forbidden City was not just a palace. It was a gilded prison filled with nightmares. Eunuchs plotted in shadows, concubines fought to the death for favor, and rulers descended into madness. What horrors still linger in those red walls? Step inside China's most sacred fortress, where secrets have been buried for centuries and few dared to survive telling them. Under the watchful sky of the Ming dynasty, in the year 1406, a dream of cosmic order began to take form as Emperor Yongle commanded the building of a palace unlike any other, a fortress of power, a city within a city, one that would stand not just as a home to emperors, but as the eternal stage of heaven's mandate on earth. Tens of thousands of laborers, artisans, and slaves were summoned from across the empire, their sweat soaking the soil of Beijing as they laid down the first foundations of the Forbidden City, carving order into chaos, stone into destiny, timber into myth. For every gate, every hall, every carved dragon upon the beams was not merely decoration, but a statement of cosmic authority, a proclamation that the emperor was the son of heaven, positioned at the axis of the universe, his throne, the very pivot of existence itself. And yet, beneath the grandeur of this colossal undertaking, beneath the crimson walls and golden tiles that would soon rise like a phoenix over the horizon, there pulsed an unsettling truth that this palace was not only a symbol of Magus, thank you, but a prison designed to contain it. For the walls did not merely keep the outside world from intruding, they locked the emperor inside a labyrinth of silence, binding him as surely as they barred the commoner from entry, so that the ruler who was proclaimed to be all-powerful was also the most isolated of men, surrounded not by equals, but by servants who watched his every move, chroniclers who etched his gestures into eternity, and guards who ensured no whisper crossed the threshold without permission. And as the city took shape with its 980 buildings, aligned along the north-south axis like a celestial diagram, its very geometry reflecting the order of the cosmos, there grew within its stone and timber a paradox, splendor and suffocation, magnificence and fear, a vision so immense that it consumed decades. Gold drawn from distant provinces, rare stones hauled across mountains, lacquer and jade arriving from the empire's furthest reaches, all so the emperor could live at the center of a masterpiece. Yet, what is a masterpiece if it demands a toll in blood and silence, if it crushes the voices of those who built it, if it transforms the ruler into a prisoner of his own image, compelled to embody heaven's perfection at all times, never allowed to falter, never allowed to be merely human? And so from its very birth, the Forbidden City was not only a fortress of power, but a golden cage, a place where destiny glittered, but freedom withered. They moved like shadows, silent yet ever present, men who were no longer quite men, their voices thin and high, their bodies altered by a blade that severed them from ordinary life. Yet it was precisely this sacrifice that gave them access to the very heart of the Forbidden City. For the eunuchs were not merely servants, they were the hidden machinery of the imperial household, the keepers of keys, the guardians of secrets, and the quiet brokers of power. They attended the emperor in his most private moments, bathed him, clothed him, carried messages from chamber to chamber, and in doing so, became witnesses to his fears and his desires, keepers of knowledge that could build or break a dynasty. And though they began as humble attendants, stripped of lineage and future, they carved out influence that rivaled ministers and generals, weaving themselves into the palace walls like living ghosts, unarmed yet more dangerous than any soldier. Some eunuchs, cunning and ambitious, learned to manipulate the emperor's trust, feeding him only the whispers they wished him to hear, cutting off dissent before it could ever reach the throne, while others amassed fortunes from bribes and secret deals, becoming power in themselves, dreaded and despised beyond the gates yet untouchable within them. And still, there was tragedy. For behind their rise to prominence was always the shadow of what they had lost. Their bodies mutilated, their bloodlines ended, their humanity traded for proximity to power, and in that sacrifice grew a bitterness that sometimes turned into cruelty, as they schemed against scholars, plotted against concubines, and sometimes even outmaneuvered the emperor himself. For imagine the terror of a ruler who realized that those who poured his wine, who guarded his documents, who slept outside his chamber doors, were men who had no families to betray, no legacies to protect, and therefore no limits to their ambition, men who lived only through the emperor's gaze, yet could destroy him with a whisper withheld. And so the Forbidden City became a stage where eunuchs played roles larger than life. Some remembered as loyal servants who preserved the empire through loyalty and order. Others cursed as traitors who plunged dynasties into chaos. But whether saint or villain, they were always there, moving unseen behind crimson curtains, their footsteps echoing through marble corridors, their pale faces flickering in candlelight, their presence as haunting as any phantom. And when the emperor died, it was often the eunuchs who locked the doors, who silenced the halls, who decided which successor would rise and which would vanish into obscurity, making them not merely servants of the throne, but servants of shadows, wielding knives of silence sharper than any sword. They were called flowers of the inner court, chosen for their beauty, their grace, and their ability to please an emperor who could command the devotion of thousands. Yet within the gilded chambers of the Forbidden City, concubines lived not in luxury, but in a world of suffocating fear, where every smile masked calculation and every gesture could tip the balance between life and death. For to capture the emperor's eye was to gain favor, wealth, and protection, but to lose it was to fade into obscurity, or worse, to invite the venom of rivals who watched every move with sharpened suspicion. And so the palace became a theater of silent war, its players wrapped in silk and jewels, but wielding poison, whispers, and daggers of deceit. And in this shadowed contest, women plotted like generals, forming alliances, sending spies into rival quarters, bribing eunuchs for information, even resorting to deadly concoctions brewed in secret by hidden alchemists. For in a palace where hundreds of women longed for one man's attention, ambition burned brighter than love, and jealousy bled into cruelty. Stories echo of concubines strangled with silken cords, their bodies removed under the veil of midnight, of rivals forced to drink bitter draughts until silence claimed their throats, of women who, in desperation, carved their faces or feigned madness to escape the suffocating politics of the inner court. Yet these were not just tales of cruelty but of survival, for each concubine understood that bearing the emperor a son meant not only security for herself, but the possibility of ruling from behind the curtain as Empress Dowager, the true power behind the throne. And so every pregnancy became a battleground, every cradle a contested claim to eternity, while jealousy twisted into unholy acts, infants smothered, mothers banished, rumors of secret burials hidden beneath the courtyards, all painted against the backdrop of music, fragrance, and ceremonial beauty that concealed the rot beneath. And as one concubine rose, another was condemned, the palace forever shifting like a chessboard in which the emperor was the prize and the women his pawns. Yet in truth, they were far more than pawns, for history remembers Empress Dowager Cixi, who began as a mere concubine and rose to command an empire, bending ministers and generals to her will, showing that within the suffocating silks and the painted smiles, a ferocious intelligence could turn captivity into command. But for every Cixi, there were countless nameless women who fought and perished unseen, their voices lost to silence, their bones mingling with the foundations of the crimson walls, their only legacy, the lingering whispers of rivalry that haunt the palace still. And so the Forbidden City, radiant from outside, was in truth a gilded battlefield, where women fought wars no chronicler dared to write, their weapons hidden in beauty, their victories etched only in shadows. Death in the Forbidden City did not always come with the clang of swords or the thunder of drums. More often, it arrived in silence, hidden behind closed doors, where ritual and cruelty intertwined, until execution became almost ceremonial, a grim theater performed in secret, so that the majesty of the dynasty would never be tarnished by the stench of blood, and those condemned, be they disgraced concubines, treacherous eunuchs, or unlucky ministers, would vanish without trial, their names scrubbed from records, their families punished, their voices smothered, as though they had never lived at all. Sometimes the method was quiet strangulation with a silken cord, chosen for its dignity, leaving no messy evidence of violence. Other times it was poison, a small porcelain cup placed in trembling hands as eunuchs stood watch, the condemned forced to drink their fate and collapse with whispered prayers lingering on their lips. And then there were the darker rituals, more grotesque, like the stories of concubines entombed alive, sealed within walls, or buried beneath courtyards, to accompany a dead emperor into the afterlife, their screams muffled by stone, their struggles swallowed by silence, the palace absorbing their lives as though feeding its own insatiable hunger. But not all deaths were punishments, for in the Forbidden City, killing could also be an act of control, a reminder that no one, not even those closest to the throne, was untouchable. And in this carefully choreographed violence, the dynasty preserved itself, projecting an image of harmony while drowning dissent in shadows, so that the people beyond the red walls saw only golden splendor, unaware of the bones beneath their emperor's feet. And the irony was cruel, for even emperors themselves were not spared the ritualized quiet of death, their bodies laid in jade coffins, their faces hidden behind veils of gold, their attendants ordered to die alongside them, loyal servants silenced forever, so that no secret of the Son of Heaven would slip beyond the tomb. And in this way, the Forbidden City became less a palace than a mausoleum, where life was constantly measured against silence, where fear became as natural as breathing, where even in death one was not free. For execution here was not the chaos of rebellion, but the order of ritual, death dressed in ceremony to conceal its horror. And as centuries passed, these silent killings became part of the palace itself, whispered about by eunuchs, feared by concubines, and remembered only in ghost stories, so that when you walk its corridors today, you feel not just the echo of footsteps, but the weight of countless voices that were forced into stillness, their cries folded into the walls, their agony hidden behind painted dragons, their memory reduced to shadows that still cling to the stones. If you're captivated by the hidden history of the Forbidden City, don't miss our upcoming explorations into the world's most mysterious palaces and empires. Subscribe now for more untold stories, forgotten secrets, and chilling truths that history tried to bury. Unlock the past with us, and never miss a journey into the shadows. Within the high red walls and golden roofs of the Forbidden City, emperors sat enthroned as sons of heaven. Yet the isolation, the endless rituals, and the crushing weight of divine expectation often twisted their minds until majesty gave way to madness, and the gilded palace became not a sanctuary, but a cage of paranoia. Some emperors shut themselves away, trusting only eunuchs who whispered carefully curated truths, leaving the ruler blind to the world outside, while others indulged in reckless extravagance, summoning musicians, dancers, and courtesans to perform night after night, their laughter echoing through marble corridors, even as famine ravaged the land beyond the gates. The young emperor Zheng De, for instance, disguised himself as a commoner, slipping out of the Forbidden City to wander taverns and markets, sometimes declaring himself General Zhu and leading drunken escapades that humiliated the throne, while the notorious Jiajing emperor turned inward, obsessing over Taoist alchemy, consuming elixirs of mercury in the desperate hope of immortality, even forcing hundreds of palace virgins to perform grueling rituals their youth believed to feed his longevity, until their suffering became so unbearable that some attempted to murder him in his sleep, a reminder that cruelty can breed rebellion, even within the most fortified palace. Madness did not always manifest as chaos. However, for some emperors grew so consumed by fear that they drifted into silence, haunted by visions of betrayal, convinced that shadows in the corridors were assassins, that whispers in the night were omens of death. Their paranoia reflected in endless executions, where officials were purged, concubines punished, and loyal servants sacrificed simply because an emperor's mind faltered beneath the unbearable solitude of power. And what makes their madness most chilling is not only how it shaped their personal lives, but how it altered the fate of millions. For an emperor's dream, delusion, or obsession could determine war or peace, prosperity or famine. The pulse of the empire itself bound to the fragile mind of a single man trapped in a palace too vast for comfort, too silent for sanity. And when we walk those courtyards today, it is easy to imagine the flicker of candlelight casting monstrous shadows on painted walls, the air heavy with incense, the emperor's trembling breath echoing in the dark as he searched for answers in alchemy, in ritual, in cruelty, in anything that might lift the burden of heaven's gaze. Yet nothing could silence the truth that power without freedom is a curse. And within the Forbidden City, that curse drove even the mightiest rulers to madness. For centuries, the Forbidden City stood as the immovable heart of the Chinese Empire, its towering crimson gates and golden roofs proclaiming the emperor's unshakable authority. Yet history is never still, and there came moments when the tides of rebellion and invasion breached even these sacred walls, staining marble courtyards with the blood of soldiers and servants alike. The Ming dynasty, built on discipline and iron ritual, eventually crumbled under the weight of corruption, famine, and unrest. And in 1644, as rebel leader Li Zicheng's forces stormed Beijing, the last Ming emperor, Chongzhen, fled through the gardens of the Forbidden City in despair, finally hanging himself on a lonely tree upon Coal Hill, his dynasty collapsing as rebel banners unfurled, where imperial standards once fluttered. And though Li Zicheng briefly claimed the palace, his triumph was short-lived, for the Manchu armies swept through soon after, founding the Qing dynasty and seizing the Forbidden City as their throne, its halls now echoing with foreign accents, its rituals reshaped to match a new order. But the blood spilled that spring never faded, seeping into the bricks, remembered in whispers of betrayal and despair. Centuries later, the palace would again tremble under the thunder of cannons as foreign troops of the Eight-Nation Alliance stormed Beijing during the Boxer Rebellion of 1900, their boots desecrating the sacred courtyards, their rifles shattering centuries of ritual silence, and the eunuchs and servants who remained could do nothing but watch as the inviolable city was pillaged, its treasures looted, its dignity crushed beneath the weight of imperialism, proving that even the most sacred fortress was not immune to the chaos of history. And in each invasion, each rebellion, the Forbidden City was more than a backdrop, it was a witness, its halls echoing with cries of betrayal, the clatter of swords, the crash of fire-consuming painted dragons, a stage upon which dynasties rose and fell, their grandeur undone in moments of terror. And though today the palace stands serene, its symmetry restored, one cannot forget that its stones once ran slick with blood, that behind its beauty lies a record of violence, a reminder that power, no matter how divine it claims to be, is fragile, and even walls meant to protect heaven's mandate cannot withstand the fury of men driven by hunger, rage, and ambition. When night falls over the Forbidden City and the last tourists leave its courtyards, the silence thickens into something almost alive, and it is in that silence that legends breathe. For centuries of whispered tales speak of ghosts and curses that cling to the crimson walls like shadows that refuse to die. Guards stationed in the palace during the Qing dynasty told of footsteps echoing in deserted corridors, of women weeping in chambers long sealed, of white-robed figures gliding across moonlit courtyards only to vanish when approached. And many believed these were the restless spirits of concubines who met their end in secret executions, or who were entombed alive to follow their emperor into death, their sorrow etched so deeply into the palace stones that even time could not erase it. And others swore that eunuchs executed for betrayal returned as flickering shapes, their voices shrill in the night, their vengeance woven into sudden drafts that extinguished candles without warning. In the Hall of Supreme Harmony, some claimed to hear faint chanting as though rituals were still being performed, while in the imperial gardens, shadows moved against the lantern light, though no human presence could be seen. And with each story grew the belief that the forbidden city itself was cursed, that its grandeur had demanded too high a price in blood and silence, and that those who suffered within its walls lingered, trapped between worlds, unwilling to release their grip on the throne that had destroyed them. Even in the 20th century, when the palace became a museum, guards confess, said to strange encounters, doors opening on their own, laughter drifting through the air when no one was near, sudden cold rushing down corridors like invisible hands, and some even resigned, unable to endure the nightly terrors that made them feel as though unseen eyes were always watching, as though the city itself still lived. Perhaps it is superstition, perhaps memory, or perhaps the forbidden city, built to embody the cosmic order, became instead a labyrinth of unrest, each ghost a reminder that power exacts a cost, each curse a fragment of the truth, that those who entered the palace rarely left it whole. For when you walk its courtyards today, beneath the blazing sun or under the veil of mist, you may see only beauty and symmetry, but if you linger long enough in the quiet, you might feel a chill at your back, a whisper at your ear, the echo of a story that refuses to die, a haunting reminder that the Forbidden City is not merely a relic of history, it is a tomb of voices still speaking. Today the Forbidden City stands serene beneath the Beijing sky, its golden roofs glimmering in sunlight, its courtyards swept clean, its treasures displayed in glass cases. Yet behind this polished facade lies a silence heavy with centuries of untold stories. And as you walk through its marble steps, you cannot help but feel that you are stepping across layers of time, each stone bearing the imprint of lives lost, each hall whispering of secrets too dark to be written. For though the palace has transformed into a museum, its essence remains unchanged. It is still a labyrinth, built not for ceremony, but for control. Still a place where beauty and terror coexist. Still a space where the weight of history presses down like an unseen hand. Visitors marvel at the precision of its design, the symmetry that mirrors the cosmos, the artistry that elevates timber and stone into a vision of celestial order. But those who linger long enough sense something else, a stillness that seems alive, a watchfulness that suggests the palace itself is aware, that its walls remember, and perhaps even judge. For the Forbidden City is not simply an artifact of China's past, it is a living paradox, at once dazzling and dreadful, an empire's dream and its nightmare entwined. And as you gaze into the shadows between columns or trace the dragons carved into jade, you realize that the veil between history and the present is thin, almost transparent, and that the Forbidden City does not belong solely to emperors long gone or dynasties long fallen. It belongs to every echo of fear, ambition, betrayal, and longing that has passed through its gates. And in that realization lies the true horror. For the palace is not only a monument of power, it is a mirror, reflecting the fragile heart of humanity itself, showing us how desire can turn to destruction, how splendor can conceal suffering, how walls meant to protect can also imprison. And so when you leave its gates, when the hum of the modern city rushes back to your ears, you may feel a strange unease, as if the silence of the Forbidden City has followed you, as if the stories still walk beside you, reminding you that some veils, once lifted, can never be lowered again. Thank you for journeying into the heart of the Forbidden City, a place where beauty hides shadows and silence speaks louder than words. If you enjoyed uncovering these secrets, subscribe to our channel for more history's hidden stories, from haunted palaces to fallen empires. Share this story, leave a comment on which mystery we should explore next, and keep your curiosity alive, because history is never just the past. It is the echo that shapes us still.